My name is Cora Cramper, and this is my capstone presentation on the impacts of cooperative learning on students. Here is just a little bit about me and my background in education. I completed my student teaching in a third grade classroom in a small Midwest parochial school. I graduated from Briarcliff University with a major in elementary education, a minor in English, and a reading endorsement. After graduating, I was hired as a kindergarten teacher in a Midwest public school, and I have been teaching there ever since. This is my 5th year of teaching. Some of the responsibilities I have as a kindergarten teacher in my position at my school building are to co-teach in writing, develop lesson plans for whole and small groups, utilize formative and summative assessment data to group students, and I have mentored practicum students as well as a student teacher. So I want you to imagine this. It's 8 a.m. in this kindergarten classroom and time for calendar. The rug is full of 23 kindergarten students sitting crisscross applesauce, some excited, some sleepy and yawning, some hitting the students next to them, and some just worrying about dismissal time at the end of the day when they will be reunited with mom and dad. This is such a crucial time of day to get students engaged right away, and I felt like I wasn't fully taking advantage of that time the last couple of years. That's why when I was brainstorming what I could do to make this time with my students more meaningful and interactive, I decided to look into cooperative learning, and more specifically, Kagan cooperative learning structures. Cooperative learning allows for students to interact positively with one another to achieve different learning goals. My plan was for my students not to just sit during calendar, but to actually get involved in that learning we do during calendar time each day, along with their peers. I wanted to see how using cooperative learning during calendar time with different math or reading concepts would affect my students, either positively or negatively. So I went with the research question: what are the impacts of cooperative learning on students? Now, the purpose of this presentation is to first of all just share my experience during my research study and to give you an idea of what worked and went well for me. And secondly, I hope to prove why cooperative learning is worth implementing in your classroom. Here is some information on how I prepared for my study and also some details of my study. I conducted a literature review and gained some valuable information from a variety of sources that better prepared me for how to implement cooperative learning successfully, what the challenges of cooperative learning might be, and what the possible impacts of cooperative learning might be. My study consisted of 23 kindergarten students ranging in age from 5 to 6 years old. 13 of those students were male and the other 10 were female. This study lasted for approximately 15 weeks, so from September to December. At the beginning of the study, I spent a lot of time teaching and modeling 4 cooperative learning structures to my students. I had chosen these 4 ahead of time based on what I thought would work best for my students and be easiest to integrate during calendar time. The first was stand up, hand up, pair up. With this structure, I would first give my students a question or topic, like what are things that start with the letter S? And then I would tell my students, go. They would stand up, put their hand up, and walk around until they found someone to partner up with. They would then slap their hand, greet them like, good morning, how are you? And then ask the question, what can you think of that starts with the letter S? Both students in the pair would get a chance to answer the question. The students then either praise each other or coach and say, try again. So for instance, if my partner said, ball starts with the letter S, I could say, ball starts with B, try again. If my partner said socks, I would say, great job, that does start with the letter S. After the praise or coaching, they would then tell each other, thanks for working with me, and put their hand back up and walk to find a new partner to ask the same question. They would do this until they heard my doorbell chime, which meant to stop and go back to your seat. The second one was quiz, quiz, trade. With this structure, each student gets a flashcard, and we would use alphabet or number or shape flashcards most of the time. They would then stand up and use the same routine as stand up, hand up, pair up to find a partner. Then they would quiz each other on their flashcards, coach and correct if necessary, and then switch flashcards and move on to a new partner to do the same routine until they heard my doorbell chime. The third was Rally Robin. The students used their turn and talk partners for this one. I would pose a question or problem and tell the students to turn and talk. Then each student gets a chance to discuss their answer to the question or problem. So for example, I would show the sight word can. to students and ask them, how would you use the word can in a sentence? They each then have the opportunity to answer that question. And after they have had some time to talk, I would give the signal to turn back to me. The fourth was Rally Coach, and this was a student favorite. We would use handheld marker boards for this one. The students would, again, work with their turn and talk partners or someone next to them. And I would pose a question or problem like, how can you show the number 5 in different ways? One student then shows me on the marker board while the other watches and coaches if necessary. The first student shows me their answer, and then I would say switch so the students can switch roles. A book that was very helpful in explaining what these structures consist of and how to do them is Kagan Cooperative Learning by Dr. Spencer Kagan and Miguel Kagan. I use this book often throughout my study. It's a really great resource. I collected data in multiple forms during my study. I first conducted a pre-survey in September to gain a starting point for my students' behaviors and attitudes leading into cooperative learning. This is what the survey looked like here on this slide. The students would all complete it at the same time, with me reading one question at a time and students coloring in their answer at their table spots. The students also completed a post-survey at the end of the study in December so that I could compare their thoughts and feelings at the beginning and end of the study. You'll see those results of the survey later on. I would observe students during the study, take field notes on what I was noticing. I would also take pictures or videos so that I could look back at those at a later time while I wasn't teaching and make more detailed notes or observations about what was happening during each of the structures. After conducting the study, I did find that there were several themes that emerged in my study. In my classroom, cooperative learning seemed to, first of all, impact the engagement and the interest of my students. For example, with stand up, hand up, pair up, all the students would be up walking around looking for a partner to work with and share their answer with. Their talk was centered on the task at hand. And when I would announce that we were going to be using certain structures, students would yell, "Yay!" or "This one's my favorite." I would hear that a lot with Rally Coach. I had some kids who were always late to school who would eat breakfast in my classroom. And when I announced that we'd be doing a certain strategy during calendar, especially Rally Coach, those students would run to dump their breakfast so they could participate. So that showed me there was interest in what they were doing. I also noticed that cooperative learning impacted my students' social skills. At the beginning of the study, we as a class would talk about and model nice manners, eye contact, listening skills, and turn taking. When using the structure, students would greet one another and say things like, "Good morning, how are you today?" And when they would leave one another for a different partner, I would hear, "Thanks for working with me." I took note of more and more eye contact between students when interacting and positive facial expressions like smiling and nodding. Students could also recall what their partners had talked about, which showed me good listening skills. Students also did well with turn taking when working with others, and this picture shows students waiting and taking turns during the Rally Coach structure. So this was a big thing for us in kindergarten, to practice taking turns and being patient. Cooperative learning also impacted students' self-confidence in learning situations. I had a student who was an English language student who would listen to his partner but would not always respond back in the beginning of the study. But by the end, he was responding and attempting to ask questions of his partner. I also had a very shy student who was hesitant in the beginning to speak up during the structures, but in the end was laughing and talking openly with partners during the cooperative learning structures. So here are the pre-study survey results on the left and the post-study survey results on the right from my study. As you can see, the number of students who answered yes to the questions increased in all areas on the post-survey except for the question, "Did you pay attention?" Also, the number of students who answered no to the questions decreased to 0 in all areas on the post-survey except for the question, "Did you have fun?" I chatted with this student to see why she answered no, and she said it was because one of the classmates who she preferred to pair up with during the strategies was not there on the day of this survey. So obviously I made note of this because it didn't really give me her accurate thoughts of the whole study, but she was more referring to just that day. So with the survey results, I have to keep in mind that I teach kindergarten and they may not always be the most accurate results. Overall, I found that the information I had found through my literature review correlated with that of my study. Implementation of cooperative learning did in fact require lots of modeling, practicing, and reteaching with my students. For example, if I saw a student always pairing up with a certain friend during the structures, which happened as we used them more and more, I would then model and show how I can go to many different students and not just the same friend every time. All students were able to contribute and use their own strengths in the different structures, which was neat to see. Some students excelled in activities with lots of talking, while others excelled in the structures that involved the marker boards and drawing or writing. It was interesting to see how students differed. Lastly, students gained some integral social skills from using cooperative learning structures, like how to talk, listen, respond, use eye contact, and even argue effectively. I would notice these social skills not only in my classroom, but in the center room, lunchroom, and playground as well. While I gained some great information from my study, I did take note of a few limitations. My calendar time is only 15 minutes, and I found that trying to get all of the routines of calendar done and still leave the proper time for integrating cooperative learning structures was difficult. Sometimes the structures were a little rushed. I also found that certain students were always tardy, and this would cause them to miss out on calendar time and therefore miss out on the cooperative learning activities. This lack of consistency may have been avoided if I had done the structures at a time later in the day. Lastly, I only collected a survey at the beginning and end of the study, and I feel like I could have gained more information about how the study was developing if I had collected several more surveys throughout the study as well. On to the implications of my study and what I plan to do next. Cooperative learning has most definitely changed my way of teaching, and it will continue to be a part of my teaching in future years. It was most definitely worth the time and effort of implementing in my classroom. I will continue to teach the structures to my students from year to year. I do plan on not only using it during calendar time, but other subjects as well, like shared reading, science, math, and so on. The structures are so consistent that students will be able to use them from subject to subject without confusion. Students gave me valuable input on what they did and didn't like about the structures and how I could tailor them to gain more student interest. And they also gave me ideas on different ways to integrate them, like through practicing sight words and different science concepts. So I will definitely continue to get student input and use that to help influence what we do. If for no other reason, I would continue to use cooperative learning because of the social skill payoff I noticed. Cooperative learning allows for students to practice social skills in their classroom in a safe setting, and I plan on being more intentional about communicating with students the importance of these social skills and how important they are for their success in life. And I also plan on using my experience and knowledge from this study of cooperative learning and its impacts on students to guide and persuade some of my colleagues to try cooperative learning in the future and other educators. Thank you for watching my presentation on the impacts of cooperative learning. Now it's your turn. Will you choose to incorporate cooperative learning in your classroom and see how it impacts your students? I hope I have given you reason to do so.